All right. So you've sent over all this material on ancient Egypt. Looks like you're really into like their whole economic thing. And you
Hmm.
know what? I'm right there with you. It's like, forget just the whole pyramids and pharaohs for a second. Like, how did they actually build this powerhouse of a civilization that lasted for, what, centuries?
Centuries.
Yeah, centuries. That's what we're diving into.
Okay, yeah. Well, you've got some good stuff here.
Okay.
Like multiple takes on ancient Egyptian trade and from the History Hustle podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And they kind of like cover a lot of the same ground. So our mission, if you choose to accept it, is to like pull out the coolest, uh, most interesting insights and then see how it connects to like, your life today.
Okay. I love it. Where do we even begin with this? I mean, every single source you gave me seems to start with one crucial element, the Nile River.
Right. It's like it's not even just a river. Like it's the lifeblood of Egypt.
Yeah.
It was the economic engine of this entire civilization.
Yeah.
Like just think about it for a second. The Nile, it gave them the fertile land for agriculture, which meant food,
Of course. Yeah.
but it was also this super highway, right?
Yeah.
So they could move these goods around, connect different parts of Egypt,
Right.
and eventually, the world.
Yeah, so it's like they took this local resource in this case, this incredible river that they happen to have, and they basically built an empire around it.
That's exactly it. And that's a really powerful lesson for us today.
Okay.
Like we should be asking ourselves, what's your Nile?
Right. That's my mile.
Yeah. Is it that unique skill you have? Or like a network that you've built?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a piece of technology you've mastered, right?
Hmm.
The Egyptians, they teach us that it's not just about having something. It's about recognizing its potential
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
like leveraging it to the fullest extent.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the Nile was like their internal engine,
Hmm.
but they weren't just keeping all this to themselves,
Hmm.
right? I mean, these sources talk about their trade networks stretching across continents.
Right.
They were really out there making deals.
Yeah, like any good, successful business, they have their key partners.
Right.
So take Nubia to the south. That was like a gold mine for them, literally.
Oh, wow. What was Egypt sending back in return for all of that?
Well, think abundance, right?
Okay.
Thanks to that Nile. Grain, of course, because that was a staple that they had in surplus.
Right.
Also linen, which was known for being like really high quality,
Really?
even back then. And something else, something that was like the ancient world's hottest commodity,
What's that?
papyrus.
Ah, papyrus. Right, that's ancient Egyptian paper, right? I
Yeah.
can totally see why that would be in high demand. Everybody needs to like keep track of things.
Exactly. And it's easy to just overlook how important it is to have, a reliable writing material, right?
Mm-hmm.
Egypt, they had this like natural advantage.
Yeah.
Because papyrus grows along the Nile
Right.
and they totally capitalized on it, right? They became like the go-to supplier for the entire Mediterranean world.
Wow. So they were smart. They weren't just trading for like luxury items. They were also strategically acquiring the stuff other civilizations needed, things that they had a competitive edge on.
Exactly. And that brings us to another, really important lesson here. Diversification.
Okay.
Just like a good investor today, Egypt didn't put all their eggs in one basket.
Right.
They knew that having multiple trade partners was really important.
Yeah.
To the east, for example, there was the Levant.
And just as a reminder, the Levant, that's
Oh, yeah, that's the region that includes modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, that whole area.
got it, got it. And what's so special about the Levant?
Timber, my friend.
Timber. Okay.
Essential for building, shipbuilding especially, but not something you'd find a lot of in the Egyptian desert.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
You also got olive oil, wine, copper.
Wow. So each trade route brought in something different, something that they needed to keep their economy balanced and thriving. It's like they were building this super complex puzzle, and each trading partner was bringing in a different piece to complete the picture.
Exactly. And sometimes those pieces came from like far-flung, mysterious places,
Oh.
One of these sources talks about this land called Punt, which has like fascinated historians forever.
Hmm.
Like we don't actually know the exact location, but it was probably somewhere along the coast of the Red Sea.
Okay.
And get this, it was the destination for one of ancient Egypt's most famous expeditions, which was actually led by a woman, Queen Hatshepsut.
Queen Hatshepsut. See, that's a name that deserves its own deep dive someday.
Absolutely.
Okay, but for now, just this image of these, Egyptian ships loaded down with goods to trade,
Yeah.
sailing into this land that's like shrouded in mystery.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to picture, right?
It is, it is. And it also speaks to like their ambition, you know?
Yeah.
This drive to explore and also to build connections, even with places that were far, far away.
Absolutely. And so what did they bring back from this mysterious land of Punt?
Yeah, what do they bring back? I have to know.
Well, we're talking luxury goods here
Yeah.
and exotic stuff.
Like what?
Gold, of course,
Verse.
because who doesn't love gold, right?
That's right.
But also incense, myrrh, incredibly valuable resins used for perfumes and religious ceremonies.
Mm-hmm.
They even came back with exotic animals.
No way. That's incredible. So ancient Egypt was at the center of this incredible web,
It really was.
with these threads connecting them to all these different cultures and economies. But, I mean, this wasn't just about getting cool stuff, right? It seems like it was just as much about building relationships, too.
Absolutely. The Egyptians were masters at cultivating relationships.
Yeah.
They understood that a strong network was absolutely crucial to their economic success.
Hmm.
And that, my friend, is a timeless principle.
Yeah, it really...
Think about your own life,
Yeah.
your career, like your personal goals. So much of that depends on the relationships we build and nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same principle, really, just on a different scale. It's one thing to talk about like trade routes and all these exotic goods.
You're right.
But like, I bet you're wondering, what was it actually like to be in the middle of all this economic activity?
Oh, absolutely. A couple of these sources mention marketplaces, but they don't really paint much of a picture. Like, was it just total chaos? Or was there some kind of order to it all?
Okay, so imagine this. You're walking into a marketplace, right?
Okay.
In ancient Thebes.
Yeah.
The sun is just beating down on you.
Yeah.
But there's this energy in the air, this buzz.
Yeah.
You've got merchants calling out, they're showing off their stuff.
Hmm.
Bolts of like colorful linen pottery that's gleaming in the sun. The aroma of spices is just hitting you everywhere.
Oh, wow.
It's a full-on sensory experience.
I bet bartering was like the name of the game, like, I'll trade you these 3 chickens and a basket of figs for that nice necklace.
You're not wrong. For those everyday transactions, yeah, bartering was how they did it.
Right.
But their economy was growing, right?
Right.
And those trade rights were expanding.
Mm-hmm.
So things started to get, a little more complicated. They needed a more, I don't know, like a standardized system.
Okay.
Something to represent value consistently across the board.
Okay, so did they have, like, coins with pharaohs' faces on them, or...
Not coins like as we picture them now, but they were definitely ahead of their time.
Okay.
Think more like gold, silver, and copper rings,
Yeah.
but standardized in weight. So these rings, they acted like a kind of currency,
Okay.
especially for bigger transactions and trade with other, kingdoms and stuff.
It's like their own, like, proto-money system, which makes it way easier to figure out a fair trade for, like, I don't know, a shipload of cedar wood without having to figure out, like, okay, how many goats does this equal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But honestly, none of that would even been possible without one super crucial element. It often gets overlooked, but
Right.
organization. And that's where the unsung heroes of the Egyptian economy come in. The scribes.
The scribes, yeah, the meticulous record keepers, right?
Way more than just record keepers. These were seriously skilled individuals.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They started their training super young, like as kids,
Wow.
learning hieroglyphs, mathematics, law. They basically became the backbone of Egypt's whole bureaucracy.
Makes sense. I mean, even back then, they needed someone to wrangle all those transactions, right? Make sure everything was running smoothly.
Imagine how much information we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Tax records, details on all those trade agreements, how much grain was harvested every year,
Mhm.
even like royal decrees,
Mm.
all of it meticulously documented. We're talking their version of big data.
It's like their version of a massive spreadsheet, just with papyrus and a really steady hand instead of Excel.
And a seriously sharp mind, too. It wasn't just about taking dictation, right? These scribes, they analyzed information, they advised government officials, some of them even wrote literature.
Wow, so they were really holding it down.
They were essential. Keeping things stable, making sure the economy was successful, that was them.
It really makes you think about how important organization is,
Mhm.
even for our own goals, Like, I'm no ancient Egyptian scribe, but we could all use a little of that meticulous record keeping in our lives.
Totally. The Egyptians knew that information is power, right? And that a good system is the foundation for any kind of success.
Okay, so we've got this picture of this complex society, strong government, international trade, this seriously organized bureaucracy. But what about, like, the average Egyptian? Did they have any say in the economy? Or was it all just top down, Pharaoh makes the rules kind of thing?
See, that's where things get really interesting. It wasn't just the pharaoh calling all the shots. Ancient Egypt actually had this fascinating mix of state control and private enterprise, which, when you think about it, is a very modern concept.
So kind of like a mixed economy then.
Yeah.
A balance between government influence and, people being able to do their own thing.
Exactly. The pharaoh, obviously, as the big boss, they controlled those major sectors like agriculture, mining.
Right, like all those massive state-sponsored projects,
Yeah.
the pyramids, all the temples, those were huge undertakings, employed tons of people.
And probably kept a whole army of scribes busy, just keeping track of it all.
Oh, for sure.
But alongside those big state-run projects, you had artisans, craftsmen, merchants, all running their own businesses.
Really?
Yeah. Think like family-run workshops, cranking out pottery, textiles, those incredible pieces of jewelry we talked about earlier.
So it was like this back and forth.
Of
You
this.
got the government providing a stable base.
Yes.
And then, like, individual people are driving innovation and filling those market stalls with cool stuff.
Exactly. And this balance between having that centralized control, but also allowing for individual enterprise, it's something a lot of societies are still trying to figure out today.
Right.
Finding that sweet spot where both can work is tricky.
That's a tough one. So it shows how, like, ahead of their time their thinking was. Even back then, they got the need for both structure and flexibility in an economy if you want it to really be successful. But it couldn't have all been smooth sailing, right? Like,
Right.
even with the mighty Nile and all those brilliant scribes, they still must have run into challenges, right?
Of course. Even the best systems have weaknesses.
Mm.
And remember, the Egyptians were really dependent on the Nile's floods to keep their agriculture going.
Right. Too little water, crops fail, too MSCH, and suddenly you've got widespread flooding. Talk about a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And then you've got those periods of political instability, too.
Right. The times when the pharaoh wasn't so strong or there were those internal power struggles.
Yeah.
I imagine that didn't exactly create the most stable business environment.
Let's just say it wasn't exactly great for economic growth. Trade routes could get messed up. Taxes might not get collected.
Right.
It reminds us that even with good systems, the human factor, like good leadership, stability, that stuff matters so much.
It really does. And of course, we can't forget about those, shall we say, external reminders that Egypt wasn't alone out there in the world.
Oh, right?
Those times when foreign powers decided to drop in unannounced and not for a friendly visit.
Right.
Invasions, conquests, that sort of thing that's got to shake things up economically. It reminds you that no matter how successful a civilization is, it doesn't exist in a bubble. There are always outside forces at play. So with all that working against them, how did they do it? How did ancient Egypt manage to not just survive, but like truly thrive for centuries? What's their secret? Did they have like the ancient Egyptian version of too big to fail?
Well, there's no one answer, but a big part of it was just their incredible resilience.
Resilience.
They didn't just bounce back from setbacks. They seemed to learn from them, too.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example. What did this resilience look like in action?
Okay, so picking up where we left off, even with the Nile, the scribes, this whole sophisticated system they had going on, ancient Egypt still had to deal with some economic curveballs every now and then. Totally. Just like us today. You can have all the best plans, all the backups, but sometimes life throws you a curveball. And for the Egyptians, that often meant their old friend, the Nile, the very river they depended on, decided to, act up a bit.
Right, too much water or not enough. Either way, their agriculture took a hit. And we're talking about the foundation of their whole economy here.
Absolutely. If the floods were off, suddenly you've got food shortages.
Makes sense.
And then people get anxious, trade gets disrupted. It all just snowballs from there.
Yeah, one thing leads to another.
Exactly. And then you've got those times when, politically, things weren't so stable.
Right, like when there was a weaker pharaoh or all those internal power struggles they had sometimes.
Right. Those definitely didn't create a very business-friendly environment. Let's just say that.
Definitely not.
Trade routes would get messed up. They might not be collecting taxes as efficiently.
Yeah, right.
It just goes to show you can have the best system in the world, but if you don't have that human element, the leadership, the stability, things can go south pretty quick.
Totally. And of course, every now and then, someone would show up and remind them that Egypt wasn't alone out there.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Those times when foreign powers would decide to pay a visit,
Right, and not exactly to borrow a cup of sugar.
Exactly. We're talking invasions, conquests,
Yep, the kind of visits that really shake things up economically.
big time. It's that reminder, no matter how prosperous a civilization is, it's not happening in a vacuum.
Yeah.
The rest of the world's always out there.
Always.
So with all that working against them, and Nile's mood swings, internal politics, the occasional invasion, how did ancient Egypt manage to not just survive, but to thrive for literally centuries? What's their secret?
Well, I don't think there's one magic answer, but one of the biggest things that stands out is their resilience.
Resilience.
Yeah, they didn't just bounce back from these problems. It's like they learned from them too.
Okay, I like that. Give me an example. How did that actually work?
One word,
Grain.
grain. Okay,
Yeah.
remember, they were always producing way more grain than they needed.
Right, right.
Well, if there was a crisis, a famine, political problems,
Yeah.
whatever it was, they had this whole system for redistributing that surplus grain to the people who needed it most.
Interesting. So it acted like a kind of safety net.
Exactly. It kept people from starving, which kept things, relatively calm and stable.
Like their ancient version of an economic stimulus package.
Exactly. And then on top of that, they were amazing at getting those trade networks back up and running.
Even after they'd been disrupted.
Oh, yeah. They understood that being isolated was bad for business. To really thrive, you got to be connected to the wider world.
So it wasn't just about having a good system. It was also about being flexible, right?
Yeah.
Adaptable. That sounds pretty familiar, don't you think?
Absolutely. That's a lesson that never goes out of style. No matter what you do, your career, your finances, even just how you approach problems in your life. Being adaptable, being resourceful, it goes a long way.
Be adaptable, be resourceful, and maybe keep a little extra grain stored away, just in case.
Exactly. And honestly, I think that's one of the coolest things about learning about ancient civilizations like the Egyptians.
What's that?
We can see echoes of ourselves in them. These timeless patterns, principles for success and failure, they're still playing out today, just on a different stage.
It's a good reminder that we're not so different from the people who came before us. We all face challenges. We all want to succeed. And hopefully, we all learn from both the good and the bad.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And who knows, maybe thousands of years from now, someone will be digging around in what's left of our civilization.
It's kind of wild to think about, isn't it?
Totally. And they'll be looking at our economic systems, our trade networks, whatever our version of papyrus scrolls turns out to be.
Maybe they'll even dig up a podcast episode or two, give them a little glimpse into how we saw the world.
I'd love to think so.
And speaking of glimpses,
Well,
I think we've just scratched the surface of ancient Egypt's economy.
just barely. There's so much more to uncover.
There really is. But for now, I hope this deep dive gave everyone a little more appreciation for how ingenious and resilient the ancient Egyptians were.
Me too. And hey, maybe even a couple of useful ideas for navigating our own economic journeys.
Always a good thing. And listeners, we'd love to hear what resonated with you, what lessons stood out. Let's keep this conversation going.